Golgotha is a place name. In Hebrew and Aramaic, the THA ending tells us that it's originally Aramaic. It's used in the Gospels, and it's explained to us as a place of a skull. The Romans needed a place which was outside the city, which was on a main road where passers-by would come and go and see the execution, because the idea is to deter criminals. So you can see over my shoulder a major contender for Golgotha. It does look something like a skull. It is outside the city and near a major road.
We know that in Rome they crucified once 6,000 people as part of a victory celebration on one of the main roads leading out of Rome. But this gives you an idea of how widespread this was and why perhaps hundreds of thousands of people were crucified over a period of 800 years.
Crucifixions were done throughout the ancient world: Europe, North Africa, Western Asia, Great Britain. Not only were men crucified, but women and even dogs.
It was a type of punishment which was preferred generally for slaves, people who were responsible for some type of insurrection towards the government.
When someone is crucified, they go through considerable agony. For one thing, they can't get their breath. Their circulation is failing. Their body is producing prodigious amounts of sweat. It is a very agonizing death for anyone to go through.
I have a feeling when we see Christian art, it looks like Jesus is up there in the air, probably about 10 or 12 feet. I don't think that that really would have been the situation. I think it would have been closer to the ground. One of the reasons I think that this is true is that we know that many individuals were left on the cross. And we know that, for example, dogs, hyenas, jackals, other predators were the ones that just simply took the body apart. So if it would have been high up in the air, it would have been very, very difficult. You have to realize there was not one type of cross, nor was there one way to crucify. The first thing here we have is a tree with a root system with these arms which are radiating out. And what would have happened here, the individual after the trial would have been brought here. The arms would have either been nailed or else they would have been simply tied to the cross. The second type we have here, this is a type I think which would have been used in public places in terms of execution. This is something which was brought in. It's not that tall. And what would have happened was that the individual after the trial, after being beaten, would have had to carry the cross bar. He then would have been nailed to the cross or tied to the cross, and then he would have been lifted up, and he would have been in this manner here. Now, this is a Roman invention. This is called a sedicule. And one of the problems with being on the cross is exhaling. You can inhale, but it's very difficult to exhale. So what happens, the Romans would have put this seat up here. You can use your arms and your legs to pull yourself up and sit there, but you can't sit there very long. You can sit there for maybe a few seconds, and what happens, you slip down again. Once you slip down again, the whole process starts all over again. The pain, the agony, it just becomes prolonged. Here's a third type here. Notice that there's no crossbar. If you remove this sedicule, if you take an individual, a young man, if you take a young man, you put his hands, either tie them or nail them above his head so the body is hanging. If his legs are free, he can pull himself up for maximum an hour. If his feet are nailed or if his feet are somehow tied and he can't, he's dead within 4 to 10 minutes. It's that quick. We know, despite the fact that so many people got crucified, there's only one piece of evidence which has ever been found in the world, and that was here in Jerusalem, ironically, in 1968. What we have here, we have what's called a calcaneum. This is the heel bone on the right side of an individual which was crucified 2,000 years ago. Now what had happened was that the nail, again, went from the outside of the heel into the heel and then into the tree. We even know that there's a little bit of wood here, which we can see if you look very, very closely. And this was olive wood. And this olive wood works as a washer to prevent the individual from shaking himself free.
It is interesting that not only in the teachings of Peter and John in the temple, they say crucified on a tree, but in Galatians chapter 3:13, Paul says crucified on a tree. For Jews, the most cursed death imaginable was that being left hanging on a tree outside the city wall. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 22 and 23, cursed be the one hanging on a tree. It was a cursed death because there was not proper burial. It was left for hyenas and vultures. It's a death so cursed that it makes the one who suffers that death to be cursed. If he dies in the Jewish court system, the method would have been by stoning. That does not make one cursed. But if he dies in the Roman court system, and you referred to Pontius Pilate, then his death would make him cursed. Maybe, and we can't be sure, maybe there was a motive. If he suffers that death, people won't be able to continue to believe that he is the Messiah. How can he be a cursed Messiah?
Paul, in the epistles, tells us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and that the wages of sin are death. And this wage must be paid. The penalty for sin has to be paid. And so Jesus, on the cross, he paid that sin for all of humanity.
The power of God and the grace and forgiveness of God was stronger than the most cursed place we can imagine. There's no person, no time, no circumstance, no place too cursed for God's presence still to be there, reconciling the world to God's self.
The death of Jesus shook the world, literally. Darkness fell, and the earth trembled. Afraid for their lives, the disciples hid, thinking they would be crucified next. 3 days later, the women visited the tomb and made a startling discovery that also shook the world.